Hello, everyone. I am Jennifer Braverman.
And I'm Ellen Selm.
And welcome to our podcast, Stories from the Earth,
where we explore mankind's relationship and connection with the natural world.
We would like to take a quick moment to invite our listeners to consider supporting us through a humble little donation. If you go to our anchor page and click the support button, there's options to donate for $1, $5, or $10. The donation will go towards helping us with future projects, such as launching of our herbal educational curriculum we've dubbed the People's Herb School, as well as funding to help take the show on the road and do some on-site interviews and reviews at herb farms and schools and other interesting places relative to our podcast. You can also leave us a rating and a comment on Apple Podcasts. That would be also very, very helpful.
Today we welcome guest Molly Pekula, founder of RadianGuidance.com. Molly is an adept astrologer and a lover of earth medicine and bodywork for wellness, finding ways to combine the three passions harmoniously when working with her clients. So here's a great opening question. We had run some dates by you for scheduling to record this podcast, and you chose Tuesday the 22nd for recording, which makes it 2/22/22. No doubt something about that must have been auspicious. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, so between the two dates, I wish I had some really grand explanation of what this special date means. But for me, I just use simple numerology, and I liked that it came out to a 12, which of course, as you guys know, 12 zodiac signs. And then that reduces to 3, which is the number associated with the planet Mercury, which is really good for communication. Yeah, so that was kind of my thought process behind it. But I know there's so many kind of theories out there of it being a portal, it being a reset of sorts. And 2, as you probably know, is like a very relational number. So it's the number of in astrology, the moon. But the way we think about 2 is like the duality. And so seeing both sides of things. So I thought it could be a nice number for speaking and connecting.
So that's why when Mercury goes into retrograde, communication is supposed to be all kind of wonky.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's funny because all day today I've just been really wonky, but it's probably just me.
Maybe you're feeling the energies of this auspicious number day.
Maybe I am. I thought, I'm like, am I getting PMS early or something? I don't even know. I was just all day today. I was like, really.
The moon is in Scorpio, so it's not the best, the most amazing sign for the moon to be in. So take that for what it's worth.
Between herbalism and astrology, which did you get interested in first? Did this first discipline lead you to the second? If not, what did and what led you to combine the two together in the creation of your practice? So you've got kind of a combined practice, which is really cool.
Yeah. Definitely I was initially drawn to astrology from a very young age, and I went on to school, and the closest thing to studying astrology that I could find is philosophy and psychology. So I was a double major in psych and philosophy. And when I really think about astrology, to me, it's our most ancient understanding of the elements, which very much ties into the herbal world and our understanding of the natural world. And it's just a great way to understand body, mind, and spirit by understanding ourselves in this elemental way. And so I studied astrology longer, and it was after college where I really kind of came to herbalism. I used to go to this tea shop in Philadelphia called the Random Tea Room, and I would go in, and they had this menu of all the herbal teas and all the uses, and they had different tea people working. It was a really tiny shop, and no one was on laptops, which was really cool because it was just a really special place, and you always had good conversations. And one of my now really good friends worked behind the counter, and she was a pretty adept herbalist at that point, had studied it pretty seriously, worked in a lot of the community gardens, and she was just very prominent in getting me kind of into realizing that like, wow, I can use herbs as medicine. At the time I was working in like a psychology research lab at UPenn for like addiction research. And I remember reading on the herbal menu, kudzu, which is very prominent in the South, how that's helpful for alcoholism. And I just thought it was really cool. I was like learning how to heal myself through plants. Specifically, I had really chronic skin issues, acne. I was on birth control for many years. So using food primarily as medicine, and then understanding, wow, there's a deeper level when you're out of balance, you can bring these herbs in.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it was cool because I worked in a research lab, so we had access to all the UPenn archives, and I would like research the old herbal texts because you could find old manuscripts, and that was where I drew the connection. I was like, wait a second, this is, if I would find Culpeper's texts, and it would be like these old compendiums of herbs, and then they're talking about the planets, and that's where that connection kind of clicked. I was like, wait a second, these two fields have been connected and are actually kind of meant to be used together. And so the deeper I did research into that, and luckily I was able to find modern teachers who teach that. And that's actually, there's like a revival of this happening right now. So it's really cool.
Because before sort of at some point, all the medicine was herbal. Mm-hmm. That's what it was.
Yeah. And I suppose, at that time too, because people were, by process of how the world was at the time, living inadvertently closer to nature, so it wouldn't have seemed as odd at the time, maybe compared to now, to like make those connections between like planetary alignments, planting things by the signs, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it is pretty cool that it's having a revival.
Yeah, no, you're right on. The people were more in touch with nature in many ways, and that include the night sky and thinking about planets and how they affect us. And one of the coolest things I remember learning was that the RX on prescription bottles, actually, there's a few theories floating around, but they all connect to astrology. And one of the main theories is that the doctors would put the RX on the medicine. Back then, as you mentioned, it was plant medicine. They'd put it on the prescription because it would denote that Mercury was retrograde, so they couldn't perform surgery, which would have been the very popular thing to do, like bloodletting, or they would go to kind of extreme things back then.
Right.
Not doing that kind of medicine, but they would say, okay, hey, Mercury's RX, we're going to give you some plants instead.
Pretty crazy. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, we take it for granted. We're like RX. And we see it, on CVS or modern pharmacies. Another concept I heard, one of my teachers said that potentially it also indicated radix, like a shorthand for radix, which means circle. So the idea that the doctor had already looked at the chart before. So either way, it has an astrological connection.
Wow. You been an astrologer, or I guess would like formally call yourself as such?
Yeah, I would say like serious study, 7 years, professional practice, just the last like 3, because for a while you want to build up your proficiency and your confidence and being able to look at charts. But I started like professionally like charging for readings about 3 years ago.
When you first learned about astrology and your own natal chart details, was there anything in particular that really jumped out at you as a whoa factor or aha moment, which changed or impacted your life and made you want to learn more and get to the point where you are now with your practice?
Yeah, it's so hard to pinpoint to one particular moment or event, but I would just say, to answer that question, and hopefully it's not too vague, but just understanding certain pivotal transits that I went through, marking pretty significant moments in my life, whether it be more traumatic events like accidents or just kind of phases of life that I went through. Understanding my chart gave some just context for some of those things. And I think a lot of astrologers have a similar story, that it's like, oh, wow, there are these lessons our soul is here to learn. And we don't necessarily come in a blank slate, and we have certain experiences at certain times.
So I think a lot of people might think of astrology as just like the quirky horoscopes in newspapers you read just for the fun of it or whatever. And maybe they're a bit more into that than that, but they might not delve any deeper to anything besides their sun sign. So, can you explain for us and the listeners why and how astrology is more complex than that? Like, what even is a full natal chart? Why is it important to have for better understanding of one's unique thumbprint, so to speak, compared to just the surface level sun sign stuff?
Yeah, it's a really important thing to mention. And people are becoming more aware of this, I think. But yeah, a natal chart is essentially the map of the sky when you're born. And it's usually presented in like a circular form. It's almost like I like to say it's kind of like your unique mandala, your geometry, essentially. And it's not only delineates where the sun was, the month you're born, right? But it goes a lot more layered into transpersonal connections, meaning like the pieces of your chart, like Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, the outer planets that connect us to generations and kind of bigger groups of people. And then the more fine-tuned level of knowing your moon sign, which is one of the more personal bodies in your chart, and looking at your ascendant, your rising sign. So that was whatever was rising in the sky the moment that you came in. And that's like the most unique point to your entire chart. And that's really important in medical astrology, is understanding like the person's ascendant, because the rising sign is the first house cusp and it represents the individual's physical body. So it's a very big part of your innate constitution and how you're influenced by the environment externally. So for instance, people who are like air or water risings tend to just be a little more sensitive than people who have fire or earth on the rise, like have a little more of like a, you could say, sturdy constitution, perhaps. But there's a few factors you look at, and it's important to look at because sun sign is like, it's like taking one dimension of this really beautiful kind of symphony of who you are, and like just being like, oh, that's it. It's like only reading like the first page of a book and then being like, oh, I think I know that book. So the chart is really this like awesome map. And at first it's complex to like learn all the planets and what they represent, know what the houses represent. But eventually, when you're proficient in the language of astrology, you can pretty easily look at a chart and grasp like what's going on. And every planet represents a different organ system. Every sign or element that planet is in will say a lot about how that organ system is in a person. For instance, someone who has maybe their moon in Cancer, for instance, it's domicile, but it might describe a person who has like a pretty sensitive intestines or stomach organ system. So you can get a lot of clues as to the person's like elemental makeup when you see the whole chart. So you might be a Libra sun, Jennifer, but you could have potentially your whole chart could have a lot of like earth influence. And then that would really flavor your body type and the way that different organs are operating, knowing like that you might have more of an earth dominance despite being an air sun. So it just gives a fuller picture, a more holistic picture than just taking your sun sign. But the sun sign, it's an important part. So I think it got kind of extracted into pop astrology for a reason, because you don't need to know your birth time to know your sun sign. So I think it's just for that reason it's become popular. But as people get more and more into astrology, more people nowadays even know like their rising, their moon, and their sun. It's more commonplace to find.
So as you were talking, I was realizing that I'm like, I mean, I'm familiar with the charts and stuff like that. I've never had mine read, but I'm familiar. But I just realized that you mentioned it can tell you a lot about your health, but I was like, oh, I never thought about what specifically. I'm like, I know it can tell you more information, but I was like, what specifically more? And I never thought about that until you started talking, and that's really cool. Health is one, and then you said your relationships, and Is there something, anything, what other things can it tell you?
Yeah. So timing, the themes of certain years of your life or days of your life, like really it's an amazing timing tool. So the original application of astrology to health really was about timing surgeries in a medical context. They would use it a lot to like know the best time to operate for people. In a broad collective context, besides just the individual, we can understand astrology through a historical understanding of what's impacting the collective at a given time by knowing the transits that are just happening, period, in the sky right now. So your chart takes a snapshot of you when you came in, your soul, but those planets kept moving and they're in a certain configuration in the sky right now. And today actually is the Pluto return. According to Western astrology, this is the US Pluto returns happening actually today. But transits are like waves. Like it's not just like one day, something changes. There's kind of this kind of energetic shift. It's like knowing the weather in a sense. So knowing that like the US right now has its own birth chart and it's going through the Pluto return, it's having big implications for all of the world because the US is a pretty big player in a lot of economies. So yeah, there's the collective level, the historical context, like we can see trends back in time and connect them to certain transits that were going on. We can know, the general weather for everyone. And then we, on a more personal level, we can understand, like what's this year kind of bringing thematically for me? What are some, elections, which are timing or time periods of time, like a date that you can use to your advantage. So it's just an awareness that I think allows you to be more strategic and then also have just a deeper level of knowing like why certain periods might be bringing certain themes.
That's really cool. It's odd. Like I said, I've known about astrology. I'm familiar with the concept, but I don't think I ever really knew what it was really like, especially in the broader context that you've just described.
Yeah. And you brought up relationships, and that's a great one too, because obviously we're all so unique in our makeup. And then it's cool because a lot of the people who are closest to us, family, I've seen crazy stuff in my charts with like my siblings compared to my chart or my family members. And like, I've even understand them better. Like I've known them my whole life, but by the time I finally like read their charts and I was like proficient enough to do so, it was like really eye-opening where I was like, wow, that just really makes sense that my brother has Mars on the ascendant. Like I feel that from him. But I wouldn't, I didn't know the astrological connection to it. So yeah, you can do something called synastry where you can compare your chart, overlay it with another individual's chart and see how the two charts interact. So you can see where you might trigger an individual or where you guys really like connect and really like, you have that kind of momentum. Like I'm sure you and Ellen have some really cool connections where you can work well together. And, that might be some Jupiter, Saturn things going on between your two charts. So it's a way to like really unpack relationships. And ultimately it's a tool for understanding. It's a map, like I said. So it's like, it can be problem solving if things are going wrong. But honestly, people don't just have astrology readings as like because something's wrong with them. Sometimes people just want more information so they can kind of proactively plan things to be more smooth.
Maybe you can clarify. I think I read this. I must have read it because I don't remember where else it would have come from. Years and years and years ago. Something that had explained that one way to look at the ascendant is that it's sort of an energy or personality that you're aspiring to, whether that be something you're bringing into this life on top of, the basis of your sun sign or whatever, or maybe even something that will carry on into the next life or something like that. But because I just read it once and it stuck in my head, and I've never talked to an astrologer to actually ask, is that a thing? Is that something that ties into the ascendant? Is like this
definitely
inspirational energy?
Yeah, like it's an angle of the chart, and it's that back in the day they called it the helm of the ship. So there's a lot of correspondence with nautical metaphors in astrology, because back in the day, actually ships would use the stars to wayfind and get to where they needed to go. And I think that metaphor works great nowadays, because it is like it's a guiding tool. It's a navigational tool. So the ascendant, very much like it's a very specific, as I mentioned, to the minute we're born. So if you don't have the right birth time, that can sometimes throw off what your ascendant is. That's why birth time is really important. But yes, it's the helm of the ship. So it's like this, like the helm of a ship's like the steering wheel. And so the idea that whatever sign is your ascendant, whatever planet rules that sign is like the ruler of your chart. So for instance, if you're a Sagittarius rising, the ruler of that person's chart would be Jupiter. So they'd be like a child of Jupiter. So that planet has like a lot more of kind of influence over that individual's life. And knowing that what sign is on the rise definitely helps you understand, like, and then you would look at, how's Jupiter in that person's chart? Is it aspected well? What house is it in? That gives a lot more detail and information to like where that life's trying to guide towards. But you're absolutely on point with that it is like a really important part of like how we're orienting to the world, and how like the direction our soul is trying to go.
I love the map idea, and I love that it gives you, it probably also gives you a zoomed in approach, but it also seems to give a very zoomed out approach and a full picture approach. And I really like that. I'm familiar with, tarot and that, those ideas, and that feels, and I know people use them together and in similar ways, but tarot is I feel like it's very zoomed in. It's very like specific in whatever question you're asking or whatever, and this seems more like
big picture perspective.
more of like a whole encompassing aspect about it.
There's a branch though of like traditional astrology that I'm actually getting really into studying right now, that how they actually originally used astrology, like the whole natal chart thing is actually more recent, like after the Hellenistic period. That was one of the early Western astrologies. Like natal astrology actually came a little later. And originally they would do horary. So astrology was very much used to have this timing, contextual understanding of things. So like kings and emperors, rulers would use the knowing where the planets were as like auspicious dates for things, or when to not go into battle or when to go into battle. So horary astrology is actually like kind of a branch off of that, where you could ask a question, where astrology really was used as a divinatory tool like tarot. And you'd ask a question and the astrologer would cast the chart for the moment they received that question, and you can assess the chart to get a yes or no answer. Yeah, it's
a
pretty
lot of
crazy.
work. Maybe they're like, let's just stick to tarot because you just have to close the card.
Let's just stick to runes or something.
Runes, yeah.
It's quick though. Like you can do, when you get good at horary astrology, you can answer a question in like 15 minutes or less. And back in the day, they would do really quick consultations. And I heard this really cool story of I think it was like William Lilly, one of the original astrologers who popularized horary and wrote a lot about it, translations from the Latin text. So he's like one of the big like fathers of this branch of astrology. He did it in pubs, and it would be like used a lot to like, he would overhear a lot of gossip in these pubs in England. And it would be like, he would cast charts to figure out like if what they were talking about really happened, or if it was just like, so it's cool because you can get pretty straightforward questions, though. There's some considerations with that. Like, for instance, they would say like, make sure it's a serious question. But honestly, I've used horary to find lost items, like to locate where something I lost is. So it opens up a big Pandora's box of a lot of natal chart astrologers kind of scared of horary, or even more modern leaning astrologers who don't even like look at traditional astrology, who think like, oh, it's all free will. But really in my practice, I've come to like understand that there is like a fated aspect to it. That's the whole kind of reason we would even look at astrology, is to know we don't come in a blank slate, and to know that like by using this tool, we can get some information that maybe like we're not privy to without looking at it.
Sorry. brain.
That's a lot to chew on there.
It is a lot to chew on, and like I said, I haven't really thought about it, and what you're saying is very fascinating and very interesting, and I definitely need to get my chart read.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you think you just picked up a couple new clients.
It's funny because it's like I think I just always assume like people like get what astrology is all about, and then like I'm constantly always being reminded like, wow, I should just start with basic, like just. I mean, I was doing workshops for a while where it was like just going through each sign and plants of each sign, and yeah, like helping people just with like real basics because it can quickly get like woo, But it is such an amazing tool. Yeah, I would say though a great way to start for like audience or you guys is even just like you can go on astro.com, generate your own chart if you've got your birth time, and start. You can even start just reading what they. I'll caution against just picking things out because with an astrologer they can kind of holistically more look at the whole thing, whereas online you get little like info bites for certain aspects.
Not necessarily so much on the interrelation.
Yeah, and a good astrologer who's like seen a lot of clients will have more anecdotal, experiential kind of insight into certain aspects in a chart, or like, oh, I've seen this before. There's definitely value to talking to a person, but yeah, at the very least, like just even knowing, 3 basic parts of your chart and contemplating those things can be really eye-opening.
Yeah, just to start out, but and I definitely understand. I definitely see the value of going to an astrologer, having someone help you interpret all of that information. So, what has your training been like for both astrology and herbalism?
Yeah, with astrology, I definitely started out mostly how like a lot of people start out just reading a lot of books and doing a lot of self-study. I was lucky though to find a lot of older mentors in the field. It's actually kind of a signature in my chart. I have Saturn conjunct my North Node, and there's kind of this saying around that where there's a lot of older kind of people to help you on your path. So I have felt that effect. One of the astrologers I really enjoy, his name's Gemini Brett, and he's also like a friend, and he does a lot of astronomy for astrologers. So he's all into like renaturing astrology. And so I very much resonated with him. And I also have done some peer groups with OPA, which is the Organization for Professional Astrology, which is like a pretty more recent organization, but they're trying to really create some sort of like they do peer groups where you meet with other astrologers and you assess a chart together and get feedback on your reading styles. And they're open to like different branches of astrology, but I would say it's predominantly like more Western astrology based. So I've done some peer groups with them. And right now I'm about to start like a horary astrology formal course because I'm trying to get more of that like traditional backgrounds like kind of drilled into me. Because even though horary astrology is used for answering a question, you can really use it by practicing it in that context of like answering questions. You're really learning like it's like practicing the basic arithmetic of astrology because you have to know all the essential dignities, like which planets are at their strength in certain signs and which planets are weak. And so that just naturally carries over into being able to like bring those skills into a natal chart reading. In terms of herbalism, I've studied with my teacher is Seja Popham, and he is with the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and he's one of the few people, there's like more than a few, but the handful of people who teach like alchemical herbalism, astro herbalism. So I did his astro herbalism program, and that was amazing. And that's really connecting medical astrology with understanding how to determine like planetary rulers of certain plants and looking at those signatures and creating those connections. And then I've also studied a more medical astrologer is Judith Hill, and she's actually Seja's teacher as well, but she's a pretty well-known medical astrologer, and she's got programs and books on medical astrology. I highly recommend her books. So that's kind of my background. I would say it's always growing though. I'm always learning because you don't really stop with these types of subjects.
Now that you've developed a practice that incorporates so much of the holistic healing approach, how would you define health and healing?
Well, to me, healing is like aligning or synchronizing with the natural ebbs and flows of life. So understanding it's not like this static endpoint that we're trying to get to, but it's really this kind of like course correcting as we go to make sure we're just like in a nice equilibrium. Yeah, that would be my definition.
What is the benefit of using / knowing astrology when it comes to healing the body? And we may have touched on some of this, but
Yeah. Well, on a core level, like I mentioned, you can really get to the like core of a person's elemental makeup through their astrology chart. You can kind of guess, and there's other methods. Different branches of medicine have like pulse diagnosis or tongue diagnosis. So with astrology, to me, it's like you're getting the user's manual for the person's body and their soul and their spirit. It's like, oh, here's the user manual. And in and of itself, you could get lost in that map, but I think like with like health and healing, like I do hands-on healing touch and like working with like helping people with herbs, like, hey, try this tea or try working with this plant essence. It's like you're then getting under the hood of the car, because it's like, I don't think just taking the map, like you can get a lot from just the map on a psychological level and on a spiritual level, but then on like a physical level, that's where like the other tools come in. So I think it's a great map for then knowing, well, which tool do I use? Like what plant do I use? Because there's a million plants, as you ladies probably know, for like inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
But then to narrow it down and be like, well, this person has a lot of fire in their chart. Would turmeric really be anti-inflammatory for this person, or is that going to aggravate the fire in them? So it helps you really like, I feel like, just kind of get in there and do like surgery of like, this plant is going to be great for this condition, because you can understand the root of an issue through like what's happening to that planet that's representing maybe the illness or the organ that's out of balance. And then you're like, okay, here's the remedy. And usually it's antipathy. So sometimes in homeopathy, though, you use the same elemental, but a lot of the time it's like, hey, if there's a lot of fire, maybe we want to bring in a more watery plant that will like moisten and help the person's inflammation that way, knowing that they're really fiery. They have a really fiery digestion, as an example.
I guess, that's got to be, it is super multifold, because you've got the constitution of the individual as the chart is showing you, possibly then, how that's manifesting symptom-wise in an illness, which I would assume also is then relating to the specific time and place that they're at when they have the illness. So like,
totally.
Just on a very base level, maybe I'm assuming you might treat a common cold that happens in the spring or summer differently than you might treat a common cold that's happening in the winter, not just because of the season, but because of what's going on on that bigger scale. Even like it might be the same person, so there might be some overlap in things you would recommend, but the timing, I would assume, comes into play too.
Yeah, like the timing, sometimes you'll see like a transit might trigger an illness. Like maybe a person has a certain predisposition in the chart and maybe it's fine for a while, but maybe there's a certain stressful transit to that planet that maybe triggers like, oh, all of a sudden I'm having this weird kind of symptom. It'll then kind of like highlight it. So sometimes that's where I think the timing of it plays in, where you can be like, oh, that kind of makes sense that this is expressing right now because you have this stressful aspect to this planet. And then it also kind of gives a little bit of peace of mind too, because then you're like, well, see if this doesn't get better, by the time this planet moves out of this sign. Like, and so you can kind of highlight areas where you might, periods of time where you might be more vulnerable. Like, for instance, to give a kind of crazy morbid example, my current partner actually like lost part of his finger before I ever met him, in a kind of a freak accident. And when I looked back at the transits he was going through, it was like a classic accident prone transit. And, you know, like we can get deep in the rabbit hole of if he had known, would it have really stopped it? I mean, but I do think that knowledge is power. And so it was interesting. This particular transit, I think it was Saturn squaring his natal Uranus. Or no, sorry, Mars squaring his natal Uranus. And that's like a very classic, like any hard aspect of Mars to Uranus, conjunction, square, opposition, could be like a more accident prone time. And it was also during an eclipse when it happened, which was like even more kind of ominous. So that's like kind of a morbid example. And I don't want to harp on like the negative, but in a positive light, you can then look at the chart and be like, okay, these are organ systems we want to strengthen in you, you know? And as an herbalist, I feel like it's always about, ideally, right? It's preventative before it gets to like the acute point of like, you need to go get an antibiotic or something.
Yeah.
It's really cool because like when you look back and study this stuff, Hippocrates, like all the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath. He has like a famous quote where he said that he who practices medicine without understanding astrology is not a doctor, but a fool. So it was very, very like important. And many of these ancient, like Paracelsus, he's like the father of like modern herbalism. He was also an astrologer. So it's like a lot of these people, they knew both, got that kind of holistic view of the person. So you're not as blindly just trying to like willy-nilly throw things at a symptom.
It's funny how that quote does not get repeated a lot these days.
No, yes. And a cool thing is the word pharmaceutical, like the etymology of that word actually is sorcery. There was a more kind of magical, animistic way that medicine was applied. And yeah, I think we ought to like pay attention to that.
From my health experience, you know, I had like 2 chronic illnesses, and it would have been cool to sort of know some information before their onset, because one of them it just was like, it was there, and then that is like poof. So yeah, I think there's definitely some value into looking at your chart and seeing where maybe that stress points might be, and where maybe you need to sort of either like take it easy, because I feel like the body, you know, can handle the stress, and then it just seems like there's just like that moment where like it can't handle it, and that's where you tip over into illness. But sometimes there's no warning at all. You know, you're just living your life and doing things, and sometimes you don't know that, like, well, maybe I shouldn't be sleeping just 2 hours a day, 2 hours a night, and like eating all that sugar or something like that. Like, that could be very valuable just to sort of know, or help you be more aware of what's going on. Because I don't think that we are, and I don't think we're taught that. We're sort of like taught the opposite, how to ignore our bodies, our physical bodies, and they're just as important as our spiritual bodies or our other bodies.
Like if you can see a bigger picture, obviously that's more holistic, because then you're not just waiting for something to happen and being reactive. You can try to be a little more proactive. Yeah.
Especially, you know, if you have like a stronger constitution, actually it's counterintuitive, but sometimes if you have a stronger constitution, maybe there's a lot of earth there, you can kind of maybe abuse the body without kind of seeing the effects of it till it reaches that tipping point. A really cool tool that I would recommend, there's actually a really great iridologist here in where we all live in this area, Asheville. Iridology is really cool because it's very kind of galactic in its own way, but it's looking at the eyes as like really being these windows into our health. And, you know, I went for a session, she takes a photo of your eye, and it's a map in and of itself of like where there's stress in the body, where there's toxicity, where there, you know, we're all victim to toxins nowadays. Yeah. But it really was like, it was eye-opening, pun intended.
Yeah.
When I could see like, oh, there's dots showing bowel pockets or congestion in my bowels, it kind of gives you that extra motivation to be like, oh, like, wow, I'm not really noticing it, but I want to eat a little cleaner, be a little more mindful. And then, yeah, looking at a chart could be the same thing, where it's like maybe you have that visual, so you're like, oh, I can it's just another way to connect to ourselves. And with the chronic thing, something that, because I'm sure we all have our kind of stories of what our health issues have been, but I think it gives that extra added lens of maybe the spiritual level of the lessons connected to that physical thing that's going on. And sometimes if we can heal it on the spiritual, the physical is just like the manifestation of something like even deeper down that wants to resolve.
Yeah, I had to do a lot of mind body work, and I had to start with the body because that was not functioning quite well. When I got to see a therapist and she was having to be really, really good, then the healing happened just twice as fast. It just went boonk. It was like the last little puzzle piece. It's definitely important to get all of that sort of working together. I guess my aspects were not communicating very well. Like after a lifetime of not really listening or paying attention, then it's like I said, I don't feel like we really get taught. So I'm not surprised that I wasn't connecting the mind and body.
It's like your own hero's journey that you and then now it's probably a big part of your practice of health and education.
Yeah. So I'm definitely curious to see what's going to show up in the chart. So because I still don't know a lot about why, how, what, all that stuff that we were talking about. So
yeah. Now you have another missing piece to explore.
I do.
So Molly, you have some educational offerings on your website in addition to the more personalized healing work that you do. Can you talk a bit about what you like to teach? Do you ever get invited to do classes in person anywhere or through other outlets besides your own website? And if so, what are some of the kinds of things you like to teach in those venues?
So my website, it's 12 classes. I think one might be missing actually. It's like one file I couldn't find, but I'll have to probably re-record. But it's I did this year-long. I used to work at this herb shop in San Francisco, and I did my readings there as well. And I did a monthly kind of circle where I would serve different teas and have some snacks, and we would just keep it super simple because with astrology, it's like I want it to be accessible. But we would chat about the sign of that month, that energetic, the organ system with that associated with that sign, the areas of the body, and some plant allies that kind of are attributed to that energy. So it was like a fun way of just kind of like connecting those dots for people. And each month, everyone has a unique connection to every sign. So someone might be like, oh, that's my sun sign, or that's my moon sign, or it's my Venus, so people could kind of connect it personally to themselves and share. And it would be this kind of circle. But there was like a lecture part of it. So I have those recordings on my site. In terms of invitations, I am probably going to start just do like a class, maybe eventually a series of workshops at Laughing Elephant Yoga in Hendersonville. I don't have a date yet for that, but I'm going to probably do a class on the transits of this year, 2022, and some herbal allies and some body movement practices, like connecting to grounding through those transits. And in terms of I actually have like a house I can host events. So if people are in the Asheville area and would be interested in some sort of astrology kind of offering, I can host in the house I live. I have some land that there's outdoor space as well. So yeah, it's really just like, I'm new to the area. It's just like if the demand is there and if I'm invited is a big part. In human design, I'm a projector. So a big part of our strategy is like being invited. And so it's kind of a matter of like, if the interest is there and what people want to specifically go into in a group setting, I'd be happy to facilitate that. There's another class, actually, I forgot to mention on my website that I just put up. It's with my friend who's an herbalist and body worker, and it's on the cell salts and their connection to each of the signs. The cell salts are like the 12 building blocks of the human tissue. And if you guys know homeopathy, like they're a really big part of homeopathic healing. So we do have a class available also online, and it's a slide PowerPoint presentation with like case studies and going through each cell salt and their kind of astrological influence. And so, yeah, that's another class that is now available. So I just wanted to mention that because she's an amazing herbalist, and we have some really good case studies in there.
Awesome.
Cool. I can put all the links in the description so everyone can check those out.
What are some of your favorite astrology books and herbal books that you would recommend to others who want to start digging in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, like my library is pretty extensive. For like real beginner, I mean, a book I'm reading now and I'm loving it, and it's really cool because it's not so much like an astrology text. It's great if you like kind of more biography. It's called A Bowl of Heaven by Evangeline Adams. She's like a well-known female astrologer from the early 19th century. And she was famous for predicting a lot of pretty big events. She even predicted her own death. She's a fascinating, quirky woman, Aquarius sun, and she has a really funny way of writing. And she's like from way back in time, but she's so relatable. But her book, yeah, Bowl of Heaven, talks about her like astrology practice and how she kind of struggled because back then it was like really controversial to be an astrologer. So if you like reading like biographies, and it's a really kind of fun, quick read. She goes into like working with some of her famous clients of back in the day. That's a really good book. There's Medical Astrology by Judith Hill, if you're interested in like the medical astrology side of things. I want to definitely plug my herb teacher's book, Evolutionary Herbalism, which is more of like an herbal book, but it definitely brings in alchemy and the understanding of astrology into the herbal medicine. Yeah, wow. It's like so hard to just pick like one astrology book. I would say The Kabbalion by Hermes Trismegistus. That's just like a great esoteric book for anyone to read because it's a good foundation for astrology. And then I have this book here. It's the combination of stellar influences by Reinhold Eberton, and it's cosmobiology. So it's cool for people who like kind of more data sciencey things because it talks about the study of cosmobiology is like how do the planets actually affect all organic life on Earth, and it has a list of aspects and stuff. It might not be so much a beginner book, but definitely a great book that draws on like how the planets affect like organic life on Earth. I'm trying to think of one that's like maybe not so. I mean, the Bowl of Heaven's not too academic, like dry. That's why I would say it's good if you're just kind of like wanting to dip your toes and like hear the perspective of like a pretty talented, famous like astrologer and her kind of journey with the crafts. Because she really took it to like she was accused of the state of New York of practicing witchcraft, something like that, or fortune telling. And she just said, like, straight up, I don't use, she was an intuitive woman, and she doesn't deny that you use intuition and astrology. She was like, I'm using math and angles. So like, yeah, I'm just doing math. And she ultimately got relieved of her sentence by doing a chart to the court. It was like actually the judge's son. And he was like, wow. Like, he's like, you tell me more about my son. I never know. But Stephen Forrest, he's like a really good kind of evolutionary beginner level astrology text. His books are like The Night Sky, The Sky Speaks. He's got like kind of a series of books, and they're like really well written, like just the fundamentals of astrology. So that I would say if you want to like start studying and building up like knowing what all the planets are, he's a good resource.
So what inspires you most about the natural world?
I would say it's just the order that admits the seemingly chaotic and random, that everything has like this divine architecture and pattern to it, and that as crazy as things may seem, there's always like a way to navigate.
Like an ordered chaos.
Definitely.
Like, or it looks chaotic to us, but we just can't see all of the pattern.
So knowing that, what are some of your favorite ways to connect with the natural world and find peace and stay grounded in your everyday life?
Well, I love swimming. I love foraging, making medicine. Yeah, swimming, I would say, ties into my own astrology. I have tons of earth in my chart. I'm a water rising, Pisces rising though, and I feel like that's like probably when I'm the most at peace is swimming, and I feel like it could just like it helps me remember to release and let go because earth wants to just like hold. And so I would say swimming is like my favorite outdoor pastime. And then if I'm not doing that, probably hiking and collecting plants and then thinking about what I could do with the plants.
What role do you feel herbalism and astrology play for the future of health and healing?
I think that it's us collectively wanting to come back to like a more vitalistic or holistic approach to healing and not seeing things like in a vacuum, like symptoms just as this like strange thing that's happening to us, but we can like have this more holistic lens of ourselves and then what's going on around us and then treat it accordingly.
It's a little more empowering.
Yeah, unified with nature and we're not so separate from it. It's like we're connected to like we're all connected to what's going on a collective level. So we don't have to feel so alone in that process either.
Do you have any new and exciting ventures coming up that you'd like to share with the audience? Be it a product, be it a product launching or educational opportunities you're offering, or things you're studying, or calls to actions you're working on, etc.
Well, I'll probably be doing some local classes in the like greater Asheville area, probably in the next month. So as I mentioned, that would probably be more on like the transits of the year. I try to be like pretty active on social media. I have a YouTube with my friend called Uranian Streams, Uranian, like the planet Uranus, and it's we chat about like transits. We chat about basic astrology topics for people who just want to learn. We talk about human design as well, which is kind of another branch connected to astrology, but yeah, it's probably a whole other topic to get into. But yeah, we talk about those things on the channel, and we're probably starting to like interview people more on our channel connected to astrology topics and people's questions. I mean, I think it'd be cool to do more like specific questions live or chart readings live. But yeah, if people want to reach me, they can find me on my website, radiantguidance.com, social media at Radiant Guidance on Instagram. I do, yeah, my favorite thing is probably like one-to-one with people. In person is always great, but I do Zoom and I work with like craniosacral healing, tuning forks, and then herbal recommendations as fit and what's needed for the person. So yeah, the consultations, and then my website has classes, and I'm open to teaching in person if people are out there and want astrology workshops in their venue. I'm not scared to travel.
Well, again, links will be up in the description. Everyone can check out your website, your Instagram, YouTube channel. I love when I see people having YouTube channels, herbalists going on YouTube, because I just feel like there's not too many herbalists on YouTube, so always need more.
Yeah, they're out. They're busy. They're out in.
They're outside wildcrafting.
Have you heard of? There's a show called Earth Speak.
No.
She interviews a lot. It's been going on for years now. I've always tuned in. It's a podcast. I don't think it's on YouTube so much, but you can find it on Spotify. And she's always interviewing herbal folks. Like I feel like that's the common thread. I mean, sometimes it gets into the more spiritual, esoteric, but the kind of common thread is like plant people.
Cool. I'll have to check that out. All right. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and I want to thank Molly for coming and telling us a ton about astrology.
Yeah.
Please follow her on her Instagram, on her website, on her Facebook, on her social media. You can follow us we are on YouTube, we are on Instagram, we are on Facebook, and you can listen to this podcast on Anchor and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And again, you can, if you'd like to support us, you can support us with your dollars for $1, $5, or $10 if you go to our Anchor page. We're also working on a Patreon, so stay tuned for that. And donations will go to helping us take the show on the road so we can provide even more awesome in-depth content, just more about the awesome people that we get to talk to. And if you can't support us with your dollars but still would love to support us, a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating would be also very helpful. So, but anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
time.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.